Kamini, we'll just wait for 1 or 2 minutes. But YouTube, they have they.
Good evening and welcome to our webinar, Taking the Museum to the People. MAP is delighted to present the second in our series of talks that is part of our effort to take art into the heart of the community and contribute to the exchange of ideas and the dialogue on how arts can stay relevant, especially during a crisis, and how we need to reinvent ourselves in a changing world. Before we move to the discussion, I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Vinod Daniel. Vinod is a very valuable part of the MAP family as a member of our advisory board. He is the chair of the Australian International Cultural Heritage Network, AusHeritage, and a board member of ICOM, the International Council of Museums. He has worked on museum projects in over 60 countries, published and presented over 100 papers and several hundred media articles. Over to you now, Vinod.
Thanks, Kamini. Thanks for the introduction. Before we start, could I get the person who's doing the background work, just to change to the speaker view? That's great. Thanks to the Museum of Art and Photography for hosting this event. As many of you are aware, the museum sector is going through possibly the biggest shakeup it has had maybe since World War II. The financial impact on museums will be significant, including possibly loss of revenue for museums due to government funding cuts, corporate funding cuts, and reduced patronage and hence revenue from visitors. Just to kind of throw some statistics, in Australia, in the recent budget announcement, the minister mentioned that there's been a 60% reduction in public spending towards the arts and leisure sector over the last few months. And 25% of people working in the sector have filed for some kind of unemployment benefits. In USA, they say that 1/3 of the museums would struggle to open and 10% might close permanently. One interesting data has been in China, especially in Beijing. 19 museums opened on the 1st of May after a significant period of closure. And during the first week, the average attendance was about 250 or even less. These museums normally used to attract thousands of museum visitors a day. So there is going to be a little bit of pressure. Now, every crisis presents opportunities, and so does this. Museums have been doing a bit in the virtual space. However, so far, the major emphasis prior to the COVID-19 impact has been on the physical space. So this particular time might be an opportunity for museums to unlock collections using the virtual domain, and in the process get many more visitors to come in, not only from the own city where the museum is based, but from every nook and corner of the country or from other countries. And in the process, enjoy the collections and financially contribute. This also might be an opportunity for museums to contribute more towards learning in schools through online programs that reach out to the younger communities. I'm extremely delighted that we have an excellent panel that represents all dimensions of the virtual world today with us. So we have Sri Srinivasan, who is a visiting professor of digital innovation at Stony Brook University. And he was the former chief digital officer of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and of the City of New York. We also have Carol Scott. Carol is the founding director of Carol Scott and Associates, and she's a board member of the International Council of Museums. We have Roxanne Chinoy. Roxanne is a partners solutions manager at Facebook, and she partners with leading creators and digital first content companies on growing, managing, and monetizing the presence across Facebook and Instagram. And we have Vikram Sukuja, who's the equity partner and group CEO of Madison Media, India's largest independent media agency. I think among other things, this panel would discuss on why developing virtual access programs are important and how we do it, what tools are available, how do we gauge audience interest, how do you monetize, and how do you protect intellectual property and copyright issues. The flow of the session would be as follows. We'll now start with comments from the panelists. So each panelist would limit their comments to 3 minutes. And following those comments, I'll start with a few questions from my end for the panelists, and that'll be followed by questions from the audience. So what I request the audience to do is to send me the questions. You can just type in the chat box if you're doing it through Zoom, or you can type it on the YouTube. So we have this going live on YouTube as well as live on Zoom. So either way, I'll get the questions and I'll put that across to the audience. So now let me request Sri to make his opening comments.
Thank you so much, Vinod, for having me here. I am delighted to spend some time talking with museum colleagues. I'm in New York City on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, very close to what's called Museum Mile on the east side of Manhattan, where museums like the Jewish Museum, the Guggenheim, the Met, the Museum of the City of New York are all there, the Frick Collection. And it's one of the sad things about the world right now that these museums are closed in New York. As you all know, New York loves museums, and the arts and culture scene are one of the reasons why we live in Manhattan, we live in New York City. And it's tragic to see, in addition to all the health crises we've had around the world, to see also what's happening to the culture sector. I had the honor of working at the Met as Chief Digital Officer and thinking about ways in which you could make the digital experience a vital part of the museum operations. And the museum was already online before I got there, but I had the chance to work with a team of 70 people thinking about digital and what a digital experience looks like. Our goal, I used to tell our boss, Tom Campbell, and our deputy director, Carrie Barrett, was very simple. Our job was to tell a million plus stories about our million plus objects to a billion people. So most people who would see our digital work may never come to the museum, but they would have a chance to experience it in many ways, including social and digital. And it was a mission that we were all able to get behind. And today, the museum, even though it's closed, is reaping the benefits of that immense investment that the Met made at the time. And we're seeing the museums all over the world that invested in digital and saw that it is not competitive, it's not a competition to have either digital or analog, but together it can help drive traffic, it can help foot traffic as well as digital traffic, was the kind of premise at which we worked. And since I left the Met, I've been working with a bunch of the museum organizations and cultural organizations around the world, and the same principles apply. And now during COVID, when there is no playbook, when no one has the answers on so many fronts, the museums that are able to take this opportunity to connect with their audiences, make new kinds of content, tell stories in interesting ways, they're able to bridge this gap of time and revenue, because there are ways, and I'm sure we'll get into it, thinking about revenue opportunities and things like that as well. And so my message to anyone who's working in the digital sector now, I think the world appreciates exactly what culture means more than ever. And we as people in the culture sector need to double down on our investment and also our experimentation, that not everything has to be the way we used to do things. And that's the only way we're going to get through this. If we are willing to take a chance, willing to try new things, you will see there will be, our audiences will meet us on the other side and also right through this crisis. Otherwise, you're going to see what has happened in several sectors where things have gone, what was already a crisis has just been made much, much worse. So I'm very hopeful that many institutions will be able to weather the storm, but I'm also very conscious that smaller organizations and places that didn't emphasize digital before are going to suffer greatly. And my heart also goes out to all our furloughed staff in museums around the world that have had no choice but to do that. And we're hoping that things will be different and better when the reopening happens, of course, in phased ways and in safety. We've seen already the first museum in America to open in Houston, and we're watching very closely what will happen there. So back to you, Vinod. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol, would you like to follow Sri?
Yes, thank you very much, Vinod. You've put together a very international panel. I'm speaking from London, where all the major national museums, as well as the 250 non-national museums, have been closed as a result of the pandemic. And this, they are just part of the 95% of museums around the world that were forced to close as a result of this crisis. But I think museums are resilient. They've fought back, they've reached out, and they've done it largely through the virtual space. And we've had this massive development in terms of all sorts of curated programs, podcasts, exhibition tours, sort of games and educational materials. And I think we've also got some measures that suggest about how successful that's been. I think we know from analytics that these programs have been accessed. We know from social media that they've given much pleasure and entertainment to people who are sort of homebound during these lockdowns. And we know from a combination of both that they've allowed museums to continue to have a presence in the leisure market during this particularly difficult time. But having said that, I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate at this point, but I think that because of the speed at which the crisis sort of overtook us, there hasn't been an awful lot of time to think strategically about the programs that we've been developing. I think we were just very conscious of having to get things up and to get things out. And I think we've done that admirably well. But there has been less attention paid to targeting specific audiences, clarifying what needs we're trying to address, and being able to assess the impact of these programs in the longer term. So having said that, I was very heartened about a week ago when I was participating in another webinar that was focusing on Southeast Europe, to hear a speaker of Slovenia talk about doing just exactly that. And in their case, what they decided to do was to target some local audiences. They looked at youth, and they also looked at parents and teachers of young children. And they engaged with them, and they asked them what kind of digital programs they could develop to address the needs of children during the lockdown. And they followed this advice, and their programs have been highly successful. And it's very interesting because the measures of success are not only about people accessing the programs and people finding enjoyment about them, but they're about meaningfulness and relevance. So why do I think this is important? I think as we're moving forward, I think that we can't, in museums, we can't lose sight of our values. And engaging with audiences is actually implementing that value of inclusiveness and direction setting. I think as we are in this funny position now where some museums are opening, some countries are ahead of the curve a little bit in this one, and we're straddling this virtual physical world. We know that in terms of physical visitors, international tourism is a casualty of this crisis, and therefore we are really going to have to rely on our local communities for physical visitation. And the other thing is we don't really know whether this massive uptake in the virtual space is actually going to be sustainable, and to what extent these audiences that have perhaps accessed our programs for the first time are actually going to continue once museums open physically. And I think the third thing is that I think the post-COVID museum world is going to be very different to the one that we have just, departed and are trying to re-enter. Vinod made reference to a survey which ICOM undertook, which has just been published on the ICOM website this week. 83% of the museums surveyed worldwide said they were going to have to cut programs because of scarce resources. We spent decades trying to make museums hands-on, and suddenly in a post-pandemic world where we're worried about health and safety, they're going to have to be hands-off. And I think the other thing is that we don't really know whether this virtual take-up is going to be a sustained behavior, or whether it was something that was particular to this particular period in time. So I think as museums reopen, we have an opportunity to really reimagine museums in the light of scarce resources and changed conditions. And I think we're going to have to rethink what meaningfulness and relevance mean in this post-pandemic world. And I would say that we've got three questions to address. One is, in this new world, what difference can museums make? I think the second question is, what difference do our audiences, both virtual and physical, want us to make? And I think the third question is, how do we engage them to find out? Thanks, Vinod.
Thank you, Carol. A very thought-provoking question. So before Roxanne starts, can I request the audiences to just type in your questions? If you've got any questions for the panel, please do type it in, either through Zoom or through YouTube Live. Roxanne?
Thank you, Vinod. I'm delighted to be here. I jumped at the chance of getting to do this. So I'm deeply in love with museums since I was a kid. I grew up in a really small town, about a couple of hours from Bombay, and we would often visit Bombay during the summer holidays. And I would beg and beg my parents to take me to the Prince of Wales Museum. Now it's, of course, the Chhatrapati Shivaji Vastu Sangrahalaya. And I think I pretty much remember how most of the rooms look like. And, there was a cabinet on the third floor that was full of like the most gorgeous spoon collection that you ever had. Like, I remember it to that minute detail. And, it had stuff that was in my 5th grade history textbooks, and I could actually go see that. So I think museums are integral to, I think the stories that they tell. It's just so important to make sure that the stories of the past, are curated and remain in all their glory, even in the present and the future. So I'm delighted to be part of this today. I think I loved what Carol said before, and I completely agree with her. I think anything that we do now, because it's such a crucial time, it has to be, it has to make long-term strategic sense. I think doing anything knee-jerk, anything short-term, and hoping that it's going to give, like they say, right, like short-term gain and long-term pain. It's literally like that. So anything that we do, especially in the digital realm, because it's real people involved, I think that's something that, we need to make sure that, it's deliberate, it's strategic, and sets us up for long-term success on whatever platform of choice that we choose to be on. I think this is definitely the time to, sort of look at a bunch of things. And I've seen some organizations be better at it than others. But this is honestly relevant to pretty much anyone building a digital presence, on any platform today. I think the first is all digital platforms are rooted in community. If you think about it, right, you go there for friends, for family, for getting that one, recipe, that's very close to you from someone, maybe, I don't know, thousands of miles away, right? So community is key to how we function as a species and, how we are online. So making sure that anything that you do, building communities at the heart of it. Like I know everyone's very interested in monetizing and making sure that, we bring everything online, but you will need to build a very sustained, engaged community on the base of it, and then build any, monetization options that you have on top of that, right? What about your presence sets you apart from anybody else, right? I think the second is collaboration. I think since our lockdowns have become, I think we've been blown away by the way that people are collaborating with each other. Whether it's two video creators, whether it's a fashion creator and a food creator doing something together, or it's an organization coming together and creators raising funds for them. So I think this is the time to not be in silo. So even if you are a museum organization, collaborating with others, right? I think everyone must have seen that viral challenge where people try to recreate famous portraits. I forget the museum that did it on Instagram, but it was amazing, right? Like everybody tried to recreate famous portraits that the museum had. And it was a blast. It was viraling out, like lots of press and PR, right? So this is the time to collaborate, get creative, and think of stuff like this, right? Out of the box moments that will create delight, that will set apart, who you are from anybody else, and lead to that engagement, that you can bring for your community. I think lastly, and I think the most important is consistency. I think this is a marathon, not a sprint. So anything that you want to do, you must stick to it for a particular period of time before you feel that, hey, this is probably not working, or hey, I think this is working great. We should just put all our eggs in this one basket that's doing really well for us. But all said and done, this is a deeply difficult time for everybody. And I think as much as possible, like they say, right, from great pain comes great opportunity. And there is so much opportunity here to have a really, really robust, engaged digital presence for museums that will just honestly become an asset that grows from year to year, far after this crisis is over. Vinod, back to you.
Thanks, Roxanne. We'll move to Vikram. Vikram, do you want to make your own?
Yeah, thanks, Vinod. With all this in this very august panel that we have here, I must admit that I don't know that much about museums. I know a little bit about marketing. I define marketing very simply as getting more consumers to try more of our brands more often at a higher price. So somewhere in all of this, if I have to translate into the museum kind of setup, it now seems that in this entire COVID environment, we are really having a virtual kind of experience which has to do this for us. Which sort of reminds me of the proverb that you can lead a horse to the water, but you can't make him drink it, and then on top of that, pay for it. So I believe that there are a lot of categories that we can get learnings from. So I know insurance, everybody feels is good to do, but you never land up doing it. Closer to home, what we are talking about, I always find in media and entertainment, the great stuff that infotainment, as we call it, whether it's Discovery Channel, National Geographic, History Channel, they've got some great stories, but always the overclaim in terms of, I claim to watch it, but I don't actually watch it kind of stuff syndrome actually happens. So, there's a lot of stuff where everybody believes of the goodness of museums, but we probably need to give them something compelling, which makes them actually adopt it in a big scale. So what is it that we can actually do to drive this, especially through a virtual kind of setup? I think there are three things that we should be chasing. Firstly, I think we've got to be very clear, I think Carol and Roxanne talked about the strategic things. We said we need to have a long-term plan, and we really need to get a few things right. I think the first thing we need to do is, should you be chasing trialists or should you be going after repeaters? Trialists are people who haven't visited a museum even once in a year, and repeat, of course, is getting them to go more than once. The tasks are totally different. So if you have to go after a person who's never been to a museum, how do you cast a net? How far do you cast it? What is the kind of proposition you give them? And then in that case, how do you actually get them into the net and then into the fold and develop them? For people who've already been there, it's a totally different thing. But I think if you've got scarce resources, this is something to deliberate on. Where should I put my resources, trialists or repeaters? Second point is, I think, and this is a tricky one. You've got to be very clear what your communication task to these guys is. So, here I'll just take a small example. Cadbury's is the chocolate guys. They were our client. In India, we all love sweets, and the Indian sweet is called mithai. They wanted to, Colgate's are chocolates are a small part of the entire system. Mithai, of course, is huge. So Cadbury wanted to appropriate mithai moments. Now, at this point in time, how do you go around with that kind of an ambition to appropriate mithai moments? And the idea was to actually find out what is the barrier, and the barrier was the lack of cultural legitimacy. So therein comes the entire thing about what is a communication task. So we said in all those occasions where mithai can be had, can we credibly put chocolate as an alternative? And I mean, we can talk what the strategy was, but articulating it in this particular form actually provided the sort of unlocked the barriers in the head, and then we actually had a strategy. Equally important in the communication game is how are you going to, what to say and how are you going to say it? Is it, this is where the old Chinese proverb that tell me and I'll forget, teach me, I may understand, involve me and I will do. Now, this is actually forms the very principle and the bedrock of principles of adult learning. And I think at this point in time, I truly believe, yes, virtual experiences of museums is a very immersive experience and an obviously excellent way to go about trying to actually sort of evangelize our cause. But there are also some other ones, and it'll be interesting to see if there is some other stuff that we can do apart from just the virtual tools, which can be tapped on in order to make your communication task a little easier. And the third point is in the area of targeting and retargeting. I think now, thanks to data and tech, we have an enormous capability, and Roxanne talked about the entire community piece, but there are also other ways in which you can create vanilla impressions that you actually deliver online into audiences with a great degree of texture and granularity. So we are in a position right now to be able to communicate to them, whether it's trial or it's retargeting for repeat. We can do it in a manner which can actually drive conversions better. And we are in a position where we can do it in a manner with more customized and sequential communication. So these three things that I think we should talk about, according to me. Should we focus on trials or repeaters? Number two, how do we articulate the communication task? And number three, what are the various opportunities available in terms of targeting and retargeting the consumers?
Thank you so much. I think the four panelists have established, a very good platform for us to start chatting. I can see a few questions coming. Please do ask questions, through the chat box if you can, and I'll try to streamline as much as possible. Now, all the panelists can hear me quite clearly, I presume. So my first question, I think this also is in line with what one of the viewers have asked. I think it's Aprajita has asked the same question too, is what are easy ways to get collections online and make it interesting for audience? To build something from scratch, it's quite expensive, it's quite difficult. It's not going to be that easy for most museums. So what are easy ways you think for collections, to get them online? Are there, easy platforms available to start with? So maybe what I might do is get Sri to answer first, and then probably the rest of the panelists can chip in.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and what great insights from everybody on the panel. I've been taking notes and I'm looking forward to the conversation. In terms of putting your collection online, there may be no more important task than that, to get your collections out of your basements, off the walls, and onto the internet so that people can access them in a variety of ways. At the Met, we did something which was very dramatic for us, but other museums had led the way for years. The Rijksmuseum in Holland, the Getty in LA had been putting their collections online in the, in open source, Creative Commons ways so that people could grab the photos, remix them, do all kinds of cool stuff with it. And at the Met, that took a lot longer because the Met is much more traditional. But in the end, we were able to put online 400,000 images of the Met into Wiki Commons and onto Wikipedia. And immediately the traffic, the attention to every one of the objects that was put online just increased dramatically. And because it's Wikipedia, it's a free space, free portion of the internet where you can go on and put your materials. And of course, once you do that, then you are sharing it with the world. Now, not all museums are ready to do that. I can tell you how hard it was at the Met to do it. It took the work of lots of folks like my colleague Neil Stimler and Loic Talon and others who had to fight the bureaucracy that saw anything that was put online as a kind of competitor to their traditional ways of getting revenue from their collection. But if our idea is, as the question was originally, how do we get our collections online? That is the fastest, easiest, cheapest way to do it. Our friend from Facebook will, of course, encourage us to put our materials on Facebook and all social platforms. That is also another thing that you should be doing. These can be parallel efforts. And I think that part of the issue with these ideas is the kind of mindset leap that's needed to be made. And if you can do that, then you can go on and put things online, and you should put things online. I still remember getting to the Met and looking at an early press release of the Met going online in 1995. So that was 2 years before Google, a year before the New York Times had a website. The Met had a website, and their point was they were very careful of what was put on the web because they were worried that fewer people will come if you have stuff online. And we have proven across thousands of museums that people want to see and get a sense of what you have in your collection, and then they're hungry and want to come and see it in person.
Thanks. I mean, I think that's a good point you make. I think just because something is in the virtual domain, that doesn't restrict anyone from coming. So it actually adds to the value of the object. Would any of the other panelists like to add to it?
I'll jump in. I couldn't agree more with Sri, and it's not only because I'm Facebook, but essentially think of it, right? Content is content marketing, as often we say, right? Just because something, I feel like the two things here. One is, I think it's time to sort of let the notion go that, one medium will cannibalize the other. I don't think that's true. I think the more avenues you give people to experience, any media, the more chances of them, developing a connection with it, engaging it, and then obviously moving through the entire funnel, to the point of purchasing it. I think two things here. One is, of course, content is content marketing. So getting collections online, is super important. B, I think it's the how as much as the what. So if the what is the collection, how exactly are you bringing it online? Is it video? Is it a 360-degree image? If it's this gorgeous piece that is, the star of your collection, how exactly are you showcasing it? What are the avenues available that you are using? And digital platforms are full of them, right? From 3D images to virtual tours to, I think camera angles from everything possible. There are so many ways in which you bring this collection alive. So my 2 cents would be definitely, but just also think about how this content's coming online, and how exactly are you presenting it? Are you using the strengths of the platform that you are putting this on?
Could I add something here, Vinod?
Yep.
And it's trying to build on what I think both Vikram and Roxanne have said. And going back to Roxanne's comment about creating communities, I think sometimes you can create virtual communities by what you put online. So by way of example, I worked for quite a long time in evaluation and audience research at the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney. And it was sort of in the very early days when we had just started a website, and in fact, physical visitors were actually using the website to make physical visits. We didn't actually have a virtual constituency or a virtual audience. But one of the things we decided to do was to put what they call swatch books up on the website. And these swatch books were from the early 1800s. There was no copyright on them. They were cultural commons, and they could be downloaded by whoever wanted to access them. And it was fascinating. From the time we actually put these up on the website, we created a virtual community of designers and emerging designers who are all using them for design projects. And that was it. And it was the content, and it was the usability of the content.
And
Thanks,
just,
Maybe-
just add one bill to that, Vinod. Sorry.
Go ahead, Vikram.
I'll just, building on what Roxanne had to say, where are you going to be hosting the content? I remember in the old days, there would be a website, there'd be a microsite. We also used to have a portal, which was a content portal, or almost which used to be a sort of destination for anything, the beauty or health or whatever it was. There were these kind of things. Now, increasingly, people, marketers, and are finding out that it helps to actually get a bit more democratic about it and distribute the kind of places where you can actually be seen. The important part is, so that's exactly, I think, the part that Roxanne was saying, which is one medium will not cannibalize into the other. In fact, it'll build on each other. So if you're actually available in a number of platforms, the important point, because the way you started it was by saying we have an existentialistic threat in terms of funding going away, we need to generate revenues. Now monetizing it, and I know it's part of your discussion thing, but monetizing becomes important. So if you actually give a free taste of it across various platforms, and from there you can drive everybody to a place where you can give something more and charge, maybe that's a way to go about it.
Thanks, Vikram. So now I'll just add on a couple more elements to this question and then put it back to the audience. It will be great if you can be very, short in your answers, so that'll give us more opportunities for more questions. Now, one of the concerns often within the museum community is copyright and intellectual property issues. You put something up online, somebody's going to steal it, print a t-shirt, or there are some communities whose collections, they don't want it to be exhibited in a way that goes out, because that wasn't the original purpose why the collections were acquired. So I was just wondering if any of you could throw some comments, but just make it short. Sri, you want to?
I think the question is something that we always discuss in museum conferences and things, and the way they would always be framed is, what if they put our painting on a shower curtain? And that was the thing that was always mentioned, and as if it would be just the worst thing in the world. But the fact is that anybody can grab your materials and stick them on a shower curtain anyway, and it was happening every day around the world. And to see places like the Rijksmuseum lead the way, along with the Getty and others, to say, look, our job as museums is to be part of the conversation, to share the culture that we have, that we are not custodians of art that's only sitting on the walls, to get it out there, to let people use it, to let people remix it and do things with it, is something that slowly is taking place, or is taking hold. But this will all be accelerated by this crisis.
Anyone wants to add to what?
I'll just add in. I think it's one of those very difficult questions, right? And we completely understand it. We're a platform that has millions and millions of pieces of content uploaded, every day across. And I think it's important to understand, as you're strategizing, what is the kind of content that you want to build engagement around, and what is the kind of content that you definitely want to make sure is just for a very select piece of your audience, and not for a public consumption or anything of those things. I think once that demarcation is there, what you're going to play around with, and what's purely for, say, premium members or something of that sort. Secondly, I think, and there's no perfect answer for this, but I think platforms are getting better and better at rights management tools. So at Facebook, for example, we have something called Rights Manager. Where and it's primarily for video content right now, but we're working on stuff all the time to figure out other media that, we can one day sort of pull into it as well. I also think platforms take copyright, IP, all of those things really, really seriously. So I also feel like this shouldn't be the main blocker to you as an organization not exploring a robust digital strategy. I think this is something that you should definitely account for, work towards, and make sure that you sort of cleared it out. But I think you can still have an amazing and deeply, deeply engaging digital strategy, even with managing this on the side.
I'd also say that, in fact, this is an area where it's very important for your digital strategists and your curators to work hand in hand, because I think it's very often at the curatorial coalface that it's the curators who have to negotiate sort of limited licenses with an artist, which is entrusting their artwork to a museum. And if they actually do, if they can negotiate a limited license that allows this to happen, it actually makes it a whole lot easier for the people who are working in the digital space to put this up online virtually.
Thank you. I'm mixing the moderator questions along with some audience questions because I think there's a bit of an overlap. Now, let me pick the next question. Actually, I'm going to pick a question that Abhishek Podar has put online. So now Abhishek is the person who really thought of the whole Museum of Art and Photography. So let me acknowledge what he's doing for the museum sector in India, and also for having panels such as this so that they are thought leaders in the whole field. So I think Abhishek's question, and I also had a very similar question, is in terms of audiences. The Indian audience is slightly different. I would imagine that that's in line with the kind of audience in the developing part of the world compared to parts of Europe and North America and Australia and things like that. I mean, what do you think would be the expectations for the audience in this part of the world compared to that? I mean, what would be the major differences be? I'll just leave it very open-ended because we've got such a diverse panel. And I'm pretty sure based on your audience evaluation, you would have looked at certain data. I know Sri is rubbing his hands, so go ahead, Sri.
Yes, I'm rubbing my hands because I wanted to be clear that every museum struggles with the issue of how do we get people into the museum and how do we keep people coming back on a regular basis. I can tell you that it isn't always a question of demographics or people who have money versus people who don't. The Met, as many of you know, is on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, in probably the richest zip code that you can imagine. And there are people who live across the street who don't come to the Met on a regular basis for a variety of reasons. And we also see at the same time people who come from certain countries like China that really understand, have this commitment to tourism and travel where they include the Met as part of their travel or culture as part of their travel. And so are dedicated to making sure they have time to go to museums, whereas other cultures, I always said that India, unfortunately, isn't always a museum-going culture. That people in India there are wonderful museums, but there's not that culture that we see in countries like China. Some of it is built over decades, and you have to kind of make sure you have a lot of strategic ideas on how to develop that and to keep that going to make it happen. I did some work with the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, and we were always thinking about how do you get Indians love going from India to Dubai and Abu Dhabi and the Middle East, but they go for shopping and other fun things, not necessarily to museums. So how do you think about that? And that's an issue, I think, that because in India there are so many cultural opportunities, so many options for your entertainment rupee, that making sure the museum is a distinct part of that and a viable and vibrant offering, you need to do some of the marketing ideas that you've already heard from Vikram and others to make this possible.
Yeah. I think, the other thing that it's really important in this is that no matter the cultural difference between populations, 100% of a population does not want to go to museums. In almost every country, you'll find that between 40 and 50% of people are actually not interested in going to museums. They want to use their leisure in other ways. And I guess I think that it's really very important to do population studies, to really to look at a population, whether it's in a state or in a country, and to find out what values are driving leisure participation. And once you do that, it's a lot easier to segment. And museums don't have to hit themselves over the head because they can't actually attract everyone in the population to come to them. What they'll generally find is about 50% of the population have values which are in synergy with the values of museums, and they're a lot easier to attract and convert to, just going back to what Vikram said, to the kind of the repeat, the loyalist customers that constantly sort of, if in sort of the marketing terms, actually buy our products.
And Vikram, I think based on your work and same with Roxanne, you'd have done quite a bit of audience studies, I would imagine.
Look, I don't have an answer to what Indians think about the museum experience, but I know how to get it. You'll have to go to consumers and talk to them. And it's like Carol was also saying, the values kind of study does help to see, look, end of the day, you've got to figure out what are the benefits coming out of a museum visit. It could be very deep for people who want to understand, just unravel the mysteries of the world around us, or look at history to decode the future. That's a deep one. It could be people who are just wanting to tick off things on the bucket list and say, guess what? I saw the Mona Lisa, and I actually managed to get myself photographed also. I was that third person from the left kind of stuff. Or else there can be people who actually think like, the Discovery Channel kind of guys did, which is actually say, I'm learning and I'm actually becoming, I'm learning more and therefore becoming a better person to sort of navigate this world by understanding all this. Sometimes the payoffs are very rational or semi-rational, and these are the ones that which at least the middle class India resonates more with. But this, I'm right now speculating. I think you have to go back and talk to people it's very simple actually. You do with people who've been and who probably haven't been, and then do some focus groups, and you'll get some answers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Vikram. I think like often, when creators come and say, what should my next video be about? And the first thing we say is, why don't you ask your audience? What would they like to see? And I think the principle is similar. And I actually love the question because I faced it as a kid. Like I wanted to go to museums and art galleries and my friends wanted to go watch a Bollywood movie, So I think like, it's a little different, right? Like, I think we have context of, Indians, right? We have context of our history and culture, but it's the classic conundrum between like context and relevance, right? Do we feel like it's relevant? Do we feel like it's something that, we would spend an entire afternoon when, you could, sort of be doing something else. So I'd say like always start with, people who, your most engaged base first, people who will become ambassadors for, your organization, patrons, any of those. Word of mouth is a very, very strong thing. And I think the more you build upon that and, sort of build upon that in a digital context, I think it helps. The classic case of like, what should I make next, or what should I do next, or how do I bring it online, or how should I make sure that, my collection, resonates with people? Genuinely ask your community. We have so many tools across, especially Facebook and Instagram, to do this. There are polls and there are stickers and there's so many things that will give you instant feedback about, whether you're on the right track or not. And that will give you enough signal to sort of start with it.
Now, just moving on again, I think it's from one of the people who were viewing this this broadcast. How do you think we can do more with regard to school students in terms of the experience they get? You think the whole virtual domain provides that kind of an avenue? It doesn't matter which part of the state they are in, which part of the country they are in. They can still access that. I mean, you think that that could be something that the virtual domain can provide? Maybe I'll direct this to, one of the museum people who've been, quite involved with programs. Either Sri or Carol could start off, and then others could comment. Yeah. Carol, you're there?
I'm there. I was going to suggest that Shri start.
No, please, Carol, go ahead.
Vinod, could you just repeat the question? I was actually typing something there. Sorry.
No, I was just saying with regard to school students, because that's been a very important audience for me.
Yeah.
So how could the whole, virtual domain, virtual experience, help in reaching to more students, give them a better experience? I just wanted to get the panel's views on both the concept and how it can be done better.
Yeah, I think I'd go back to what Vikram said. It's really, in some ways, it's really quite simple. It's just ask the teachers. And I think it's very interesting because in all of the research that's usually done about educational groups that are coming to museums, the museum is a supplement to the formal education system. It's not trying to replace it. It's trying to enrich and enhance the formal education system. And so I guess the key question for teachers is, you have to kind of understand a little bit about the syllabus, their, key learning areas or whatever they call them in different countries. But the main thing is, how can the museum add to what they want the children to learn in school? Where's the enhancement? And is it possible to how can you do that actually in the physical space? But in the light of, the conversation today, what kind of virtual tools can you also use? I'd be interested in what Shri would say to this.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts about schools. I think one of the things we saw at the Met is the power of the educational visit. We had about 250,000 kids coming through the museum on formal school trips. That's not counting people kids coming with their parents or grandparents. So we see the kind of transformative power that happens when you walk into a museum in an educational setting. We also found that when we haven't really talked about raising money here, but there are a couple of sectors at least in American museums that weren't being tapped into. And so one of them is the tech sector. And when you try to raise money with tech folks in America, they're really focused on what they think of as quantifiable philanthropy. They have this wrong notion that you give up 100 malaria bed nets and you save 100 lives. And so they always want that kind of data. And we were able to show the kind of data about school visits, about children's lives being transformed. That's the kind of impact that folks want in the museum world and the philanthropy world. That's a happy way, a kind of meeting point that I think is important. Also, I wanted to, you asked about the virtual world. I want to show you a slide from a presentation that I made just a few months ago in New Delhi at the National Museum in Delhi. And this is quoting from a friend of mine named Asim Chabra, who's a wonderful Bollywood writer and journalist. And he went to visit the Bihar Museum in Patna. And I don't know how many people have been there. And he says, I am blown away. I felt I was in Europe or the US. I haven't seen a museum quite like this anywhere in India. I mean, that's the kind of cultural traveler experiencing something that they don't think of and then just being blown away, as he said, by that. And then that drove me to make sure I go, just a month later, I was in the same space and quite taken by not just because they've put in a lot of money, but the way they thought about fitting in a museum like that within the environment that it was in. And it seems kind of so right for what they were doing. So this is an example of why social and digital can have an impact on people as they choose where to go, where to spend their traveling money, and attention is something that I'm always thinking about.
Thanks, Shri. I think we're running really short on time. So maybe go ahead.
Can I build on that?
Yeah. And do you want to?
I'm a great believer in the point of market entry kind of marketing for categories. So puberty is a life stage where a lot of product categories can actually, if they talk sensibly to the person attaining puberty, they actually get that adoption at that point in time. Similarly, when they become independent and just leave the home, empty nest kind of thing. And then, of course, there is the entire marriage. So, there are these kind of life stages which are point of market entries for various categories. I think school can be a fantastic point of market entry for museums. And I think where it's coming from is, now I'm just trying to take it to that other part of tell me and I'll forget, teach me, I may remember, involve me, and I'll do. If education actually takes museums as a very integral part of the education process and made that much more accessible through virtual means, it is you could hit a home run with this. So if you study something in class, and as you just go back and you're supposed to actually go for a virtual tour, come back and then talk about it the next day, the entire richness of it will come in. You will be able to get a chance to sample and then build that immersive experience. And that is going to stay with you and build a whole new tribe. I don't know whether it won't be the millennials, obviously. It won't, maybe the Gen Zs, maybe you have a chance with, or maybe the one below that.
I couldn't agree more. This is exactly how it sort of happened. There was no, when I was in school, there was no, unfortunately, no AR or none of those things. We had those gigantic projectors with those transparencies in it. But I think like a penny drop moment was when in my fifth or sixth standard school textbook, like we used to learn about the Indus Valley civilization, right? And I actually saw the dancing girl and, the priest from my textbook, and I think I must be what, 12 or maybe 13. And that was a light bulb moment. So yeah, I'm a living testament of what Vikram just said. I completely agree.
Now, just moving on to the commercial aspects in terms of monetizing, maybe I'll get Roxanne to kickstart the answer for this. See, I think you did mention about building a community, and Abhishek has already got that in his comments about, look, museums have started doing a bit in the digital space, so they've got a bit of people following, etc., etc. How do we transform that into a little bit of funding for museums? I know you already mentioned, look, it's a long-term strategy, but there could be some low-hanging fruits and other things that you can access. So just wondering what your thoughts and comments would be.
It's a great question, Vinod. So essentially, I think I'd start with, keeping in mind the fact that, an engaged community will be the most likely source of revenue for any organization. I won't talk about the paid marketing bit so much. This will be more of an organic strategy, sort of a conversation. Essentially, I think the most important thing to understand is that monetization, especially across digital platforms, and here I'll mainly talk about Facebook and Instagram, is that it comes from a bouquet of products and features. There's never really one major source of monetization. And I think the more you make sure that, it's diversified, I think you're set up for success a lot more rather than, like I said earlier, putting everything in one basket and hoping that works out. I think and there are a couple of museums that have done this really well in the past, I think the past 2 months is, for example, if you look at merchandising or gift shops or any of those things, right? Pivoting, those things completely in the COVID context. I should have taken a screenshot when I saw this, but essentially, I came across, a museum gallery selling masks with like portraits on them, or, I think some of their IP. And that was such a good idea, And I think this was 10 days after lockdown first started, and it just resonated, right? Imagine having like a piece that spoke to you so much and actually wearing it in some form or the other, right? So, and we have products across Facebook and Instagram that do that. Instagram shopping is one. We've recently launched shops across, the family of apps that's integrated. So, I think pivoting sort of merchandising and, all of those things on it is a great way to start. Second, of course, is to look at monetization. It's sort of different strokes for different folks, but this one is slightly long-term and is also a little more traditional. There's in-stream ads revenue from video content. The way that it usually works, say on Facebook or YouTube, there's a rev share between you and, there's in-stream, there's ads basically running in content that's eligible. Brand collaborations is a third, partnering with brands, and I've seen a bunch of organizations do this really well. I think especially in the times of COVID, like, I don't think digital creators are the only people sort of looking at this from like a brand perspective. And finally, There are long-term ways of looking at stuff. For example, we have a product called Facebook Stars, which is for gaming creators, where while you watch a gaming stream, you could actually pay and give stars to the person that translates into real money. And we've seen that as a use case completely turning, right? Finally, of course, there's everything from virtual, AR tours that you could do to maybe creating a Facebook group that's just for maybe a member who has bought something or has a premium membership. And then you sort of, showcase or, make sure that that person has access to content behind, like a privacy wall. So I think what I'm trying to get to is all of these tools are available publicly across Facebook and Instagram. The resources are public. And there are lots of tactical ways in which you could leverage these things, everything from swipe ups leading to a product to, creating a really cool video and retargeting content or, retargeting merchandise to people who've watched a video around it. There's so many modalities to it. I'd say definitely I think research the bouquet of options that you have across, especially Facebook and Instagram. I think Instagram especially is a medium that lends itself beautifully to all things art and culture. So, and I think pick, streams that suit you, whether it's merchandise or shops or shoppable tags, or brand collaborations, and kind of sort of start from there.
Vinod, if I
Sorry
have
for
to
the long
just
answer,
add to that, what I've seen when it comes to any kind of great content, there are three sort of revenue streams possible. Either consumer pays for content to watch the content, so subscription revenue. Then there is the advertising revenue, which marketers are actually just paying so that when people are watching the content, they can place ads out there. And the third is merchandise. So when the people are going there, they have an opportunity to go out and maybe get some great, exactly that, merchandise. I think Disney's probably done that the best. Now, in this environment, I think my guess is that getting people to pay for content is not going to be easy. In fact, that is the toughest probably of the lot. It may come later on. There've been a lot of people who tried the freemium model. I mean, New York Times has tried it, of course, they probably are still doing it, but I don't think they've been that successful. More famously, Spotify tried it for a long time, but they weren't, even they couldn't. I think it took one or two big artists to sort of get that undone, and so on and so forth. So I think the paying for content remains a huge challenge. And if you're looking at India in particular, I can almost tell you with authority that people will not pay for content. They expect it free. The part where if you can get large numbers coming in, I think marketers, and especially for something as premium and valuable as this kind of content, they would be willing to pay and they would be willing to advertise. And then, of course, the ability and over time to take that into merchandising, that, of course, is in your hands, and then try to make some money of that. That could be another avenue. So, sorry to be a dampening factor on this, but I've yet to see people who to make more than 20-25% out of subscription revenue. It's mostly 75 from revenue and 25 from subscription. If you have to take these two, and then merchandising is, of course, separate.
No, I think it's been a great discussion. I mean, I think we've opened up a whole range of different aspects in the domain. So just my closing comments are, number one is, I think a big thanks to Abhishek, Kamini, and the whole MAP team. I think what you're doing for India is great in terms of the museum movement. A big thanks to the panel. I think in true Indian style, I can do this. Just a few broad closing comments. I think, there's been a lot of, questions and comments there. And I just wanted to probably briefly mention a few things. I think often when we think of this, it's good to think of not one at the cost of the other. It's going to be probably how one could complement and build on the other. So it's not, doing this alone or that alone. I've been to so many museums, and one thing I've seen is, if you look at the broader Indian public, they do like living culture a lot. I won't say a lot more, but I think there's a lot of interest in festivals and music performances and other things, and giving the online, option where the contents, can be much more broader, because doing that on site sometimes becomes a bit difficult because of objects and the sensitivity towards objects and conservation needs and things like that. So I think, it'll be great if that's done. The second thing is, I think that's already been mentioned by Sri. I think it's not one at the cost of the other. Somebody who comes online, if they really want to see the real object, they would go there. It's like going to see Mona Lisa. It doesn't matter how many times you see it in a photo or online, you'll still go to see that. The third thing is, I think from my experience with museums, I think when I worked at the Australian Museum, they would get about 500,000 through the door approximately, and close to 20 million through the web. So, and that number was increasing, because often you get constrained on the number of people you can get through the door because of physical constraints. So there would be a whole range of aspects you got to consider, but through online. But how you convert that into a revenue model is I guess what the next bit of focus is going to be. And the very last one is, I also think, for India, this is a great opportunity to revolutionize museology and the museum movement. We have probably the best entertainment industry in the world. We got the best IT support structure in the world. The whole world comes to India for all these aspects, and we got some of the best collections. I think it's a great synergy if that could be put together. So thank you all very much. Thanks for everybody who's tuned in, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks
you,
for having
Veena.
us.
you,
Bye,
Veena.
guys.
Bye.
All right, folks,
Bye-bye.
can we get a picture of all of us? If I
Yes.
can, just 1 second.
Shri, can you
If
send
everyone
it to
can
all
look
of
at the
us
camp.
later?
Kamini and the map team, Priscilla, all of you come online. We'll just take a group photo. There you go. Kamini, Priscilla. Okay, hi. Mohammed, where are you? He's hiding. Come on, you can turn on the camera.
Turn it on. Show it on.
You can do it. You can do it. All right, everybody, look at your lens, please. 1, 2, 3. One more. Thank you.
Thanks,
Oh, wait, just
everyone.
come back. Hold on.
he's
Come
here.
back. 1 second. 1 second.
Okay.
Everybody look. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
Thank you,
Good
Vinod.
Thank you so much for
Bye.
taking time off. So
Bye.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Great, yeah. Got lots of questions as well, so.
We do.
Yeah, so we will disconnect now. Thank you.
Make sure you grab the chat before you disconnect, otherwise you lose the chat. So just copy
Yeah.
and then you grab the whole thing.
Okay, copying now.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you. So Kamini, you can end the session after that. So thank you.
Okay, so shall I get off now? Because I just wanted to grab the chat.
Yeah, I think she's doing that. I think so.
Yeah, I am trying to do that. One moment.
Okay, so let me, both of y'all can hop out if you're done, and I'll wait for Carolina to grab it first, and then thank you so much, Carol. There was just so much to learn from what you said.
Oh, thank you very much. It was lovely to meet you.
And to you. So I hope we can stay in touch and get your advice on all the interesting things that you're doing in the audience. Yeah.
I'm very happy. I've sent you my email address, so please use it. And I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Carolina, are we all done?
Okay, yeah.
Thanks. Bye, Vinod. Thank you so much.
Ciao.